A common question I receive is how do I make corrections to time cards that have already been posted? And this might be a situation where you may have gotten all the way through calculating the checks, maybe even printing the checks. But at some point you discover, oops, I've got a mistake in my time cards, but I've already posted them. So let me go through what that entails. So on the crossover side, and the situation may even pertain to a prior pay period. So the situation could be that you've gotten feedback from a supervisor or a client that says, well, gee, my check was wrong last time, and then you go back and you find. So you find a mistake and you see, oh, I have to make a correction. So this procedure that I'm about to outline is flexible in terms of the circumstances that you use it. But the bottom line is this is how you correct a time card that has already been posted, whether it's for the current pay period or even a prior pay period. So the first thing you need is to establish what the mistake was. Now you should have from daily work, you should have from the pay period that's involved, you should have had a print time cards. So you may have that report. What we do need is the exact details of the transaction so we can correct it. So either you have a print time cards, or if that is for some reason not available, you can generate the details by going to Special Reports, Time Card History Detail. And on this report, you will want to pick just the one employee at a time that is involved with the mistake, maybe even just the operation, or you might want to pick the entire pay period that's involved depending on what you know. So this can be a very detailed report, long report if you leave things blank. So don't shoot yourself in the foot by not allowing yourself to see the mistake, but certainly limit this report to just what you need to find what you're looking for. So you would use this report or another in order to have the details of what needs to be corrected. So presumably in front of you is that mistake. You will have to perhaps go and set the pay period dates to be the dates that will allow you to enter the transaction, because as you know, a gatekeeper of all the transactions is the date, so you can't get it into the system unless it matches the date. So set the dates for whatever the date should be. I do recommend using the real date. Now, if a mistake is discovered and it's months later, you probably don't want to go back and use the original date. You could use a weekend date or some appropriate date in the current pay cycle if you want to. But depending on where you're at in your cycle of reporting, that will determine which date you want to use. And I would tend to err on the side of leaning towards using the real date. Now, so you've got the pay period information allowing you to enter. You've got the details of the mistake. So it goes into time cards, daily work, time cards. And on this screen, of course, you would put in the employee ID. You would put in the date that the mistake is going to be corrected for. I'll accept this date. What I like to do is kind of an accounting principle of debit credit, or reverse the entire and enter the correction. So instead of doing a net transaction, I like to reverse the entire mistake and put in the correct line the way it should be. So the first line I'm going to do, I'm going to use the left arrow and I'm going to move over to the left margin, and I'm going to change that plus to a minus. On this line, I'm going to be backing out the original mistake. So let's say that I started at 8:30 and I had a transaction in there till 9:30, and the operation, I'm just going to use sample piece rate, and in this case I have the work order turned on. Many of you do not use that, but the pieces, then I'm going to put in 12,350. Now that was a mistake. That was the mistake that was made, and boy, that client really would have liked to have gotten that paycheck. So now I'm going to put in what it should have been. So I'm going to arrow back over. I'm going to leave the plus. I'm going to change it to 8:30 to 9:30. and it's the same operation, same work order, but that should have been 123 pieces. That might have even been a little high, but okay, I'm just making this up. But you see the idea here. So the idea that I wanted to show you is you make two transactions. Now, if I had discovered this mistake before I posted, of course, I could call up the employee and the date, and I would see the transaction. I could just correct it. So it's a real simple idea here. You're just using a negative transaction to back off the mistake. You're using a positive to put it in the way it should have been. And the net effect in this particular case is I'm not changing the hours at all, but I'm taking back $2,100. All right. Now, of course, this would, if they already cashed the check, then there's going to be those issues in terms of how do you get the actual $2,000 back. Hopefully that wouldn't have been the case. But so there may be some other questions here, but 90% of the time, this is the function that relatively new users or people who have inherited the job of doing time card entry, they don't know this simple little trick. So that's how you want to put in the corrections. You would save those corrections, and then you would proof your transactions by doing the print time cards. You would proof your corrections, see that they are exactly the way you want them to be. You would then post your transactions, and they will net against what was previously done. So you could actually do the post. You could then go over to payroll, daily work. You could import the corrections again. I don't have that configured right now, but you could import the transactions again, post them on the payroll side, and you could add, so it is perfectly okay to repeat these steps. You're not going to double post the stuff that was in there before, because the only stuff remaining after a post is the stuff that you've added since then for that date range. And you could actually, in fact, even go and do the calculate again, assuming that you haven't printed and handed out checks. Even if you've printed them, you could reprint them if you wanted to. But if you've handed them out, then you've got another issue there. There could be some questions having to do with direct deposit, but really those are logistical things that if you just think about, you'll figure out how to address that. So the key thing on crossover time cards is to know what the mistake was in detail. You have to know the employee, the date, and the operation, and the pieces or whatever. You have to know every detail of that transaction, and then you're using the daily work screen to put in a negative transaction and then a positive transaction. With that technique, you can fix anything you want in the time card system. Now, one little note I'll make is sometimes people discover mistakes that have nothing to do with pay. It could have to do, oh gee, we used the wrong non-paid operation. I would just like to correct the time card history so that is correct. Well, what you can do is, as long as you're in what I call a quiet time in the pay cycle, meaning that you do not have any posted transactions that you care to transfer to payroll, then you can make your corrections in time cards, any corrections you want. And this could be even involving pay. You can make the corrections that you want and then post those corrections. And using the crossover daily payday work, you could reset the accruals to 0, which will mean that any corrections you've made, any monies involved, will not affect the next paycheck. So this reset will throw away the transactions from affecting payroll. They will have corrected the time card side, but they won't affect payroll. So if you know how those functions interact, you can address any situation that you encounter just by knowing the reset will throw them away and will not affect payroll. A circumstance like that may be either, as I mentioned, it doesn't affect pay, or it could be that you address the payment issue yourself manually in some way. So the person's got the right pay. You just now need the payroll records to reflect the right pay. And so that could be a situation where you're making that kind of a correction on the time card side. So I hope those notes help. And as always, let me know if you have any other questions. Thank you.